you're going to bypass all those problems with Linux. You will not have this issue of having keyloggers and this crap that these vendors are installing on our personal computers that we are buying. We actually trust these vendors. We're supposed to anyway. Trust these vendors when we purchase this hardware. You and I, talking about Linux, we know a lot about computers, but your average user, think of your grandma. Alright, welcome back to FastGadgets. So it's been a minute since we did Linux in the news, so without further ado, today is December 11th, 2017, and this is Linux in the news. Alright, first things first, have a look at this release by Red Hat. This is relatively important. So several of these companies have joined forces to, they say, increase predictability, but I mean, without making a finer point of it, what they're really saying is if you use GPL software illegally and you are not releasing the updates that you have created for whatever particular GPL package you're using, we are going to consider that pirating, essentially. So what's going to happen is, if you are doing this right now, there's going to be a fair cure period of 30 days for you as a company to step forward and publish that open source, well, I should say publish the source code for that particular software package that you're using. So what I see happening often is a company will use a GPL'd software package and it won't meet the requirements that they need, so they'll create an update for it or make some changes that architecturally could be advantageous to the rest of the open source community for that particular package. But these companies want that code to remain secret because they don't want other companies to get an advantage that they already have because of the coding they've created or the changes they've created in that GPL package. So they try to hide it, but when they get called out or they get discovered that they've actually created this code and they're hiding it, what happens is, of course, if somebody wants to, whoever owns the code, because there still is ownership, right? Even though there's a GPL license on the package, some company out there still created it and owns it and wants that license to be followed. So if they get wind of a problem like Red Hat, Facebook, Google, and IBM, what happens is they decide to go after them. So what they're saying now is, let's give them 30 days, all these companies that we're aware of, and there may be some they're already aware of, to come out with that source code, or else we're going to sue. We're going to find that we need to pursue this further and probably take them to court. So here is their common cure rights commitment. Before filing or continuing to prosecute any legal proceeding or claim other than a defensive action arising from termination of a covered license, company, whichever one, commits to extend to the person or entity accused of violating the license a cure and reinstatement. If you cease all violation of the license, then your license from a particular copyright holder is reinstated provisionally, unless and until the copyright holder explicitly and finally terminates your license. And then further down here, supporting quotes from Red Hat, from Facebook, they encourage other GPL version 2 copyright holders to follow their lead. In other words, if you hold the license to that particular software, join us and help us secure this code by making sure that the license is followed, including any code changes that may occur. So Facebook, IBM all have made quotes on this statement, and I think they're pretty serious about it. But it does look like if they find you not in compliance, instead of simply suing you as a remedy in court, they're actually going to give you 30 days to officially remedy the situation. Now, even if the company or individual does remedy the situation by opening the source code that they've created or altered, it doesn't necessarily mean that their license will not be revoked. something to think about. Since we're talking about licensing, I don't know if many of you have heard about the Intel Management Engine, but it's a piece of, well, it's more than software actually. The Intel Management Engine is actually a processor die on your processor that cannot be removed, that runs its own separate OS and has its own drivers and hooks into all of your hardware, and is partly responsible for booting up the system. So it has some bootstrap functions that cannot allow you to remove the management engine or disable it. If you do, your computer won't boot up. The problem is, and talking about GPL licenses, it appears, actually, I think it's obvious. I don't know. I haven't dug into the Intel ME very much, but Intel is using Minix 3 as the operating system of choice for the management engine, which is open source. But Intel does not allow anybody to have access to the management engine or the Minix OS inside the ME. So essentially it's closed, and any code changes they've made, they have not given permission for other companies to look at and make use of the source code. So Intel wants to keep that as secret as possible, and it's very proprietary and it is encrypted, so you just can't log into the Minix operating system that's part of the Intel Management Engine. So rightly so, the posting here says probably the fact that they want to keep the management engine secret is why they're not disclosing or giving the proper legal notice that they're using it, along with showing any source code modifications. They also say not only is Minix 3 the most installed operating system on our recent x86 CPUs, but it might also be the most pirated operating system on recent x86 CPUs. So all the newer Intel processors have this management engine on it, and keep in mind this is hardware and software, and part of its functionality is to boot up the system, so you can't just turn it off. So this is a very serious issue, and many of the researchers out there think it's a serious vulnerability because we really have no idea how it works. To me, this is a really sad day. The Linux Journal is going to cease publication because they've run out of money. So this is one of those magazines, publications that was really excellent and really supported Linux. But the problem is, as I'm sure you can imagine, there weren't a whole lot of people out there that are picking up Linux paper-based magazines. Now, I hate to see the whole thing go belly up, but you would think there would be a possibility to actually have an electronic version, which I think would be really, really useful. So hopefully there's a chance that we're going to see a resurgence of some kind of Linux Journal, but don't count on it. Makes me want to go and pick up the November 2017 issue. So Phoronix did some benchmarking and testing of 6 different enterprise Linux distributions, and they were using an Intel Core i9 dual Xeon Gold systems, and the i9 was a 7980 XE, so it's an extreme edition with 18 cores, 36 thread processor with a 2.6 gigahertz base frequency and a 4.2 gigahertz turbo frequency, so fairly powerful. And the different operating systems that they were looking at is CentOS 7, Clear Linux, OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, and a couple of distros of Ubuntu. Interestingly enough, according to the article, Clear Linux 19.1.10, which is Intel's rolling release Linux distribution for enterprise, came out on top, even over CentOS several times. So something to consider when you're looking at an enterprise Linux distribution. There's one here that is standing out, and it's surprising to me that it beat out CentOS 7, which is a bit-for-bit source code compilation of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So here on page 7 of this very exhaustive look and benchmarking of these different distributions, they comment, to little surprise for anyone following x86-64 Linux performance, Intel's Clear Linux distribution by far won the most number of benchmarks on both tie-in plus Xeon Gold server as well as the Core i9 7980XE workstation. OpenSUSE Tumbleweed trailed, but with a surprising number of wins. So I recommend that you check this article out if you're doing any kind of enterprise computing or you're using Linux for any enterprise work. You might want to have a look at this and see what kind of benchmarking each of the distros have and which one would be most advantageous for you. Ubuntu Debian 9.3 released on December 9th, 2017. Don't throw away your old Stretch media, which is the current version, because that particular media is still usable. You can still install Debian 9 Stretch and then just do an update like most typical Linux releases. But there was a huge number of bug fixes listed here, and you can check it out on Debian.org news. Looking at all these bug fixes, it absolutely amazes me. I was reading through them. In addition to all the bug fixes, there's also all of the security updates. So quite a bit of updating for Debian. Now, it's not like you're going to see a whole host of changes on the surface, but most of these are for security fixes, bug fixes, problems with different applications and packages, and they've done a pretty good comprehensive job of updating Debian. So if you're a Debian user, you're probably already rolling up and doing your regular updates. If not, I do recommend that you do it. Of course, if it's a server, you may want to have a look at what the updates are and the security fixes and do a backup before you do a roll-up, of course. So on his blog, Hack4Glarus, Nico Chatelius, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, and if not, I do apologize, is a CEO of a company that uses quite a few Linux-based servers, and he rails against Debian and well, not Debian per se, but systemd at any servers that use systemd. He says that it's very, very unstable, and it was probably the worst thing that ever happened to Linux. And I don't know if I'll say it's the worst thing that's ever happened to Linux, but I will say that it does increase in magnitudes of order the complexity of the whole init system and the core architecture of Linux. And the problem is the old sys5 or systemv based distros were so much more simpler. Everything like init files or logs were simple text files that you could access. Configuration files, although to some extent, because they're package based, are still simple configuration files, but the level of complexity changed so much, and for me, I saw very, very little return for it, and that's exactly what Nico is saying here as well. And he's saying that you should support Devuan, which is a derivative of Debian. Now, what they've done is an incredibly huge amount of work. They've stripped out all the systemd components, but more so, any package that currently is systemd dependent, and it's amazing how many there are that are systemd dependent, have to be configured, recoded, and changed so that they use system5, sysv, instead of systemd, and it's an incredibly huge amount of work. Now, I don't know if Devuan's going to keep going. It seems to me like it's incredibly difficult, but there are other packages out there and other distros that are supporting the non-systemd distribution platform. So one of those, and I think I'm seriously going to have a look at it, is PCLinuxOS that's based on KDE, which is what I like. Now, the cool thing about it is it actually has KDE Plasma or Mate. It's more of a beginning type, but it does use RPMs for distribution, which is what I prefer. And it is not systemd based, so that means that all these packages here either have been stripped of their systemd requirement components, or they've been altered so that they will work with sysv. And that's a good thing, and many of these packages probably also don't need any changes. They'll run on any distribution, whether it's sysv or it's systemd. It doesn't really matter. The one thing I can say about systemd is it has infiltrated a huge number of distributions. So if you're doing server management, workstation development, you at least should know about systemd. I'm not saying you're required to run it. I wouldn't suggest that at all. But it's possible you may find that you come to a company and they have a Linux distribution that's using systemd, and it's very, very different from sysv. I found it, to me, System 5, sysv is very, very easy to use, and it really, really makes me think long and hard about what I'm using right now, which is Fedora, which I've loved for decades. I mean, I've used Red Hat when it initially came out years back, and then when Fedora core projects started coming out, I started using Fedora, and primarily CentOS, Red Hat, and Fedora. But I remember when systemd came out, and it completely altered the way, the infrastructure, the way you use Linux in Fedora, and I can't say it's for the better. So one of the things I'm going to do here in the future is I'm going to pull down a copy of PCLinuxOS, which has been around a long, long time, over a decade. So it's not like they're going to disappear anytime soon. They're sysv based, and I'm going to check it out. It's possible I may do a switch. I got to really think long and hard about that. I'll start with virtualization, so I'll virtualize a box and check it out. It's a major change to make. I mean, I can't just install it over Fedora, so I've got to wipe everything I know and have right now and start from the beginning again. So that makes me a little bit nervous, but why not, right? Something I'm going to consider. So in the future, expect to see a PCLinuxOS video. I'm going to do a distro video of it, and we'll check out the distribution. So this next section I'm going to call Why Not Linux. It's not specifically related to Linux, but when you see the types of problems that are occurring, you say to yourself, why not Linux? So let's check it out. First one, HP laptops found to have hidden keylogger. Hidden software that can record every letter typed on a computer keyboard has been discovered pre-installed on hundreds of HP laptops. This includes more than 460 models of laptop that are affected with this security vulnerability. I don't know if any of you remember when the Lenovo Yoga series ended up having, it wasn't spyware, but it was adware installed. Honestly, I just shake my head when I hear things like this. I just bought the new Dell desktop 5675. I never booted that system up to the hard drive. I pulled the 1 terabyte hard drive in there out and replaced it with my 2 SSDs, one with Linux and one with my installation of Windows 10 Education Edition that I get through work. So I didn't even set up Windows 10 on that particular hard drive. I saw no reason to do it. Put my 2 SSDs in, took out the 1 terabyte, put in my 4 terabyte, and booted immediately into Linux. So unless these types of problems are actually in the firmware themselves, they're in the UEFI BIOS, or God forbid in the management engine on Intel-based processors, although this one's a Ryzen, but there is a management engine built into Ryzens as well, and we just haven't heard a whole lot yet about that. You're going to bypass all those problems with Linux. You will not have this issue of having keyloggers and this crap that these vendors are installing on our personal computers that we are buying. We actually trust these vendors. We're supposed to anyway. Trust these vendors when we purchase this hardware. You and I, talking about Linux, we know a lot about computers, but your average user, think of your grandma, okay? She buys a computer. They're not going to understand the ramifications or how to get rid of a keylogger or what to do about it. So this is a significant issue, and it's one of those things that I say, why not Linux? A loss of confidentiality. Mr. Ming discovered the keylogger while inspecting a Synaptics touchpad software to figure out how to control the keyboard backlight. The keylogger was disabled by default, but an attacker with access to the computer could have enabled it to record what a user was typing. It was originally built into the Synaptic software to help debug errors. Sloppy. We talked about the issue with Mac OS and the fact that they had a bug, a security vulnerability that allowed anybody to get access as root if you had physical access to the system. Then it was fixed, and then Apple released an update that broke the fix. Vendors, Apple, HP, even Lenovo, who I like, I'm sorry to say they can't be trusted. That's one of the reasons that my primary operating system is Linux. Are there problems with Linux? Yes, absolutely. But this kind of garbage from vendors that you're supposed to be able to trust, they do not have your back on this. And I feel like with me, I'm going to go for Linux. All right, next. Thousands of Chromebooks mysteriously go offline. Here we go. Hey, kitty kitty. School IT administrators are reporting several thousand managed Google Chromebooks have lost their Wi-Fi settings and are unable to connect to networks. Chromebook system administrators say it is likely related to Google Apps for Education devices having their Wi-Fi passwords and base station identifiers deleted. The problem occurred after an outage to Google Online Services. Some Chromebook users have suggested entering Wi-Fi settings manually on the devices. If you know anything about schools, you know they have massive fleets of Google Chromebooks, okay? We're not talking about 10 or 20 in one classroom. We're talking about potentially thousands of these things. Do they really want to go around and physically and manually change the Wi-Fi settings on each one because Google released an update that broke their Chromebooks? Tell me that isn't outrageous. As an administrator, and I'm talking about system administrator, not the school administrator, I would be furious, honestly. And here, again, we have a viable option. You could roll out a very simple build on a very inexpensive laptop, easily as cheap as a Google Chromebook, but still equally as good with the hardware, and put a Linux distro on it. Why do we use Chromebooks? They're simple. They have all the web-based applications that we need. Linux can do the same thing. And if you ask me, I think it would be easier to manage. I'm stunned. And the thing is, you're not going to be in a situation where Google is going to break your Chromebooks because it makes a change. It's hard to say what the damage is here, but honestly, it's outrageous. Google for Education tweeted that it was aware of the issue and suggested manually reconnect their Chromebook fleets. To get your Chromebooks online, reboot and manually join a Wi-Fi network or connect via Ethernet to receive a policy update. Sorry for the disruption and thank you for your patience. Admins have reacted angrily to what they say is a delayed and inadequate response. Again, we are supposed to trust these vendors. This is unacceptable on many fronts. The outage occurred 3.5 hours ago, and this is the first you have publicly acknowledged it. These Chromebooks are not trivial in these classrooms. They are being used on a constant basis. You can't just stop having access to technology for days at a time to take one system administrator to drive around to all the schools and manually get these systems working again. Schools run on very lean staff. They don't have 2 or 3 sysadmins at every building. They usually have one for a school system. And what they do, unfortunately, is put them under a lot of pressure, so they're not able to make changes readily to thousands of systems spread across the county. Here's David, sysadmin. Oh man, this is going to be a really challenging. 300 plus devices and student who can't know the WPA key. Hello? No, they can't manually make the change. They're not allowed to. IT staff is going to have to manually re-enter your passwords or just click connect on the SSID. We don't know. Even if they do click on it, they don't have the password, so they can't log in. A Google spokesman confirmed the problem to IT News and said it's been resolved. The problem is, when you're disconnected, a resolution doesn't matter because you have to download the policy update. Very difficult, isn't it? Who's going to do that? Alright, well that's all I have for you today in Linux in the News, and why not Linux? Hopefully you'll catch me again next week and we'll do another awesome episode. If you really enjoyed this episode, consider a like and subscribe. I prefer you share it. Consider sharing it on Twitter, Facebook, whatever news feeds you might be a part of if it's something that you found useful. If you really want to help out, drop a buck on patreon.com/FastGadgets and keep the videos rolling. I always appreciate your help, and I always appreciate having you here as a viewer. Thank you, and I'll see you next time on Fast Gadgets.